Every night, a powerful CEO returns home to his slant, fearful wife, determined to punish her for a betrayal he's convinced is her fault. He believes she's the reason his empire teeters on the brink, and his cruel anger knows no bounds. But in the midst of his fury, an astonishing discovery brings his rampage to a sudden halt, a small birthmark on her back. In that instant, everything he thought he knew shatters. This mark is far more than a blemish. It's a key to secrets buried in the past, secrets that could either unite them forever or destroy them both. The wedding took place in late spring at the prestigious Grand Oak Hotel in downtown Manhattan. A lavish ceremony that made the society columns and garnered the attention of influential power players. The groom, Lucas Harrington, was the newly appointed CEO of Harrington Enterprises, one of the fastest rising investment conglomerates in the country. The bride, Eloise Morgan, was known for her quiet beauty and the faint trace of anxiety always shimmering behind her deep brown eyes. On the surface, everything glimmered with opulence, a hand-embroidered pearl-studded wedding gown for her, a bespoke tuxedo from Savile Row for him. Giant crystal chandeliers caught every glint of the bride's diamond tiara. Over 400 guests filled the ballroom, from foreign dignitaries to local celebrities, all eager to witness the union. The press fluttered outside like hungry moths, capturing photos of the glamorous couple. To the unsuspecting world, this was the merger of two distinguished families, united in both love and business ambition. Eloise's father, Joseph Morgan, owned one of the largest shipping lines on the East Coast, while Lucas's late father, Martin Harrington, had built a real estate empire that stretched from the heart of Manhattan to the sun-soaked shores of California. But behind the beauty of that special day, cracks already formed in the foundation of the Harrington-Morgan alliance. The marriage was not driven by affection and longing. It was a carefully arranged transaction, sealed by a handshake between Joseph Morgan and the late Martin Harrington, months before his untimely passing. That arrangement had been designed to secure alliances, consolidate power, and bolster the fortunes of both families. Eloise arrived at the altar, shaken by dread she could not articulate. She barely knew Lucas. Their encounters had been limited to a handful of stilted lunches, overshadowed by the gravity of their family's arrangement. He was polite but detached, seemingly consumed by the demands of his blossoming corporate role. She couldn't recall a single moment when he had looked her in the eyes with genuine fondness. To her, he was an enigma, with a perpetual storm cloud behind his handsome features. When they exchanged vows, Lucas spoke in a slow, composed tone, never quite meeting her gaze. He emphasized honor and duty, but the word love seemed to catch awkwardly in his throat. Eloise's voice trembled her answer barely above a whisper as she forced herself to vow forever. An uneasy hush floated over the crowd, soon swallowed up by triumphant organ music. After the ceremony, guests applauded toasting with top-shelf champagne. Lucas and Eloise performed the practiced routine of cutting the towering wedding cake, dancing under the swirling lights, and posing for photos. Each forced smile seemed to weigh heavily on Eloise's face, and each polite nod from Lucas felt carefully calculated. In the glimmering halls of the Grand Oak Hotel, no one would suspect that this union of two powerful families was already laced with secrets, ones that would unravel with fateful consequences, starting that very evening. The newlyweds' home was a penthouse suite in Midtown, overlooking the mesmerizing lights of New York City. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline in all its high-tech glory. From the outside, it looked like the pinnacle of luxury an interior designed by the famous Patricia Reed, whose clientele reportedly included Tim Cook and other Silicon Valley elite. Every corner boasted custom furniture, priceless artwork, and discreet staff who maintained the sprawling residence. Yet in this architectural masterpiece, Eloise felt stranded in the shadows. She had grown up in comfort, her father's wealth, ensuring the best education, the finest clothes, and the highest social status. But never had she experienced a loneliness so stark. She was living with a man who seemed to harbor a secret torment behind his cold blue eyes. Each night, Lucas retreated into his study, leaving his wife alone in a silent world of unanswered questions. The staff was polite but distant, trained to answer her calls with the minimal exchange of words. They seemed to sense the tension that hung in the air. Eloise would occasionally wander the corridors, stopping before the massive portrait of Martin Harrington. His stern features seemed to watch her with disapproval, even from beyond the grave. As the days turned to weeks, she noticed a pattern. Lucas would come home late, carrying the aroma of whiskey on his breath, and look at her with an expression mingling resentment and regret. His punishments were not physical blows, but emotional lashings. Sharp words about her perceived shortcomings, bitter diatribes about her father's interference in company matters, and icy stares that seemed to pierce her soul. No matter how much she tried to reason with him, he remained distant. If she tried to explain that she too had never asked for this arranged union, he would scoff or dismiss her efforts altogether. One late night, Eloise mustered the courage to ask him directly, "Why do you hate me so much?" She stood in the living room, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Lucas, loosening his tie, stared out at the dazzling city below. "Because you're just like your father," he growled. "The man who used my family's misfortune to force this marriage. And because you—" He trailed off, raking a hand through his hair, struggling with words that refused to come. Instead, he left her alone, the hush of the penthouse wrapping her in sorrow. Meanwhile, Eloise's father, Joseph Morgan, kept a watchful eye on his daughter's new life from afar. He made obligatory phone calls, polite inquiries, but Eloise was always hesitant to share her misery. She didn't want to reveal the reality of her marriage to the man who had insisted on it in the first place, so she lied a gentle reassurance that everything was fine. And thus, in a penthouse filled with priceless possessions and unrivaled city views, Eloise began her life of shadows, uncertain whether the man sleeping beside her was a stranger, a rival, or the key to her future if she could only unearth his hidden pain. The tension grew day by day, constricting like a boa around their fragile union. Eloise tried to maintain a semblance of routine, taking morning coffee in the sunlit breakfast nook, attending charity events for the Morgan Family Foundation, and occasionally daring to breach the fortress that was her husband's world. Lucas's days were equally demanding. As the CEO of Harrington Enterprises, he oversaw acquisitions, expansions, and countless negotiations. Rumors circulated about a shaky partnership he'd inherited from his late father, a key contract with a shipping giant that was faltering due to an unresolved conflict. Behind closed doors, whispers pointed to none other than Joseph Morgan's shipping empire. Those close to Lucas, such as his personal assistant, Anna Braun, sensed his growing anguish. Late one evening, Anna mentioned to Eloise that an unspoken feud had existed between Lucas and Joseph Morgan for years, ignited after Martin Harrington's sudden demise in a plane crash. The crash had left Harrington Enterprises in precarious shape, vulnerable to takeovers. At that moment of weakness, Joseph Morgan had stepped in. Some believed he had saved the company from total collapse. Others insisted he had coerced a large stake in Harrington Enterprises under questionable terms. Curious Eloise ventured into the old Harrington family archives, stored in a secret room behind Lucas's study. Old legal documents, letters, and correspondences revealed that Martin Harrington and Joseph Morgan had once been close friends until Martin's untimely death changed everything. One letter stood out, a half-written note from Martin to Joseph, discussing a massive loan Martin needed to keep his company afloat. The letter ended abruptly, never sent. Stapled to it was a draft contract that would merge parts of Harrington Enterprises with Morgan Shipping under conditions that heavily favored Morgan's side. It began to make sense. Lucas believed Joseph Morgan had exploited the Harrington family's tragedy. He was convinced the marriage to Eloise was the final nail in the coffin, a contract that gave Joseph Morgan deeper access to Harrington's assets. Every night when Lucas looked at Eloise, he saw the living embodiment of a deal he believed had humiliated his father's legacy. This was why he punished her with words he knew would slice like knives, with nightly reminders that she was part of a machine that had cost him not just a father, but his family's pride. Yet Eloise found a conflicting account in a personal diary kept by Lucas's late mother, Claudia Harrington. Claudia wrote about how Joseph Morgan had stepped in at Martin's darkest hour, offering a lifeline when no other investor dared. According to Claudia's entries, Joseph Morgan had not forced their hand, but rather entered a mutual arrangement, albeit one that sealed Eloise's fate to wed Lucas in the future. Eloise's heart twisted. She realized how complicated the truth might be. Perhaps Joseph Morgan's intervention wasn't entirely altruistic, but maybe it wasn't purely predatory either. She wanted to share these discoveries with Lucas, to help him see a balanced perspective and ease his simmering resentment. But she sensed that his wounded pride and deep-seated rage wouldn't yield easily to reason. That night, when Lucas returned from a grueling board meeting, she tried to approach him with the diaries in hand. Before she could utter a word, he snatched them away, scanning the pages briefly. His face clouded with anger. Without warning, he tore them from her grasp. "Don't go digging around," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Something told Eloise that Lucas's fury ran deeper than any contract or financial trick. It was personal, rooted in heartbreak and a sense of betrayal. Little did she know it would take a far more shocking discovery, a simple birthmark, to unravel the full truth of their intertwined pasts. With every passing day, Eloise recognized that she was moving through a minefield, each step threatening to trigger an explosion of Lucas's anger. Desperate to break through the walls he'd built, she found herself drawn to subtle clues hidden within the penthouse half-finished letters on Lucas's desk. Keepsakes from his parents, stacks of old photos. In one photograph, Martin Harrington and Joseph Morgan stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning widely. They looked like best friends, proud of a joint venture they'd completed, a major real estate development along the Hudson River. Tucked behind that photo was another more surprising shot, Martin Harrington cradling a small child in his arms, perhaps no older than 4 or 5. The child had tousled blonde curls and a faint smile. Eloise stared, her heart thumping. Could this be Lucas as a toddler, looking carefree and innocent, before the weight of legacy bore down on him? That evening, she gathered the courage to ask him about that picture. His eyes slid across the image, and his expression hardened. "He promised me the world," Lucas muttered, voice tight. "Then he died, and left me to pick up the pieces, left me to bow down to your father's demands." Eloise pressed gently. They seemed close, almost like brothers. Lucas scoffed. They were close. Until Morgan stabbed him in the back. She refused to let that accusation stand unanswered. "That's not entirely true," she said, stepping forward. "There are letters." He cut her off, anger flaring. "Do you think you know my family's legacy better than I do, Eloise? Do you think rummaging through old records and diaries will magically fix what your father did?" His words stung. But something else lingered in her mind. The knowledge that Joseph Morgan had once risked a huge chunk of his shipping empire to bail out Harrington Enterprises. Did Lucas know this? Or was he refusing to see it? One night, while rummaging for a ledger in Lucas's study, Eloise stumbled upon an old letter from a local law firm referencing a life insurance claim following Martin Harrington's plane crash. A single line stood out: upon successful settlement funds to be released in part to a trust for LH and in part to JM, as per prior agreement. Why would her father, Joseph Morgan, be a beneficiary? As she connected the dots, seeds of doubt began to sprout. Maybe Lucas's father and her father had forged deeper bonds. Bonds they never shared with anyone else, not even their children. Could it be that Joseph Morgan had been entrusted with something precious? Something intended to protect the Harrington line? Between Eloise's swirling confusion and Lucas's festering resentment, the penthouse seemed to close in around them. The staff moved with caution, aware that words spoken in passing could ignite fresh tensions. With each piece of evidence, Eloise's determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger. Unbeknownst to her, the final clue that would unravel everything was hidden not in documents or diaries, but upon her own body. Every night, Lucas's punishment chipped away at her spirit, yet the greatest revelation still lay ahead, waiting to explode on a night when desperation and fury collided. Despite the daily storm raging between them, glimpses of Lucas's softer side occasionally shone through like faint beams of sunlight piercing heavy clouds. One such moment occurred during a high-profile gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, hosted by the Morgan Family Foundation, to raise funds for underprivileged youth. Eloise stood at the center of the crowd wearing an elegant midnight blue gown. Donors milled about, discussing their philanthropic bids, while cameras flashed with relentless ferocity. She was poised, carrying the responsibilities of her father's foundation, greeting guests with polite warmth. Even as she performed her duties, her heart hammered, knowing Lucas would soon arrive. She dreaded his presence, fearing another evening of public hostility or covert barbs. When Lucas finally appeared clad in a black suit that accentuated his tall frame, a hush spread through the crowd. It was as if he commanded the very air around him. Eloise braced herself for a tense exchange, but to her surprise, Lucas graciously offered her his arm. Together they greeted donors from local corporate magnates to celebrity guests. He played the part of a proud, supportive husband, and she found herself unexpectedly comforted by his presence. In a brief lull between speeches, they found themselves in a quiet corner near a gilded statue. Lucas leaned in, his voice subdued. "You're doing well," he remarked, eyes scanning the crowd. "Your father's foundation. This is a big event. The exposure will help thousands of kids." Eloise nearly gasped. Was he actually offering a compliment? Grateful yet wary, she smiled. "Thank you. It's important work." She hesitated before adding, "I'm glad you're here. It means a lot to the foundation." His gaze softened, if only for a moment. "I promised your father I'd lend Harrington Enterprises support," he said as though reciting an obligation. But still, for that fleeting instant, Eloise sensed an undercurrent of genuine respect. They spent the remainder of the night maintaining a delicate balance, each fulfilling the role that high society expected. Lucas gave a stirring speech pledging Harrington Enterprises financial support. The applause was thunderous, the press capturing every second. Eloise realized with a pang that this was the charismatic leader the world admired. Could this man who spoke with such passion for philanthropy truly be the same one who tormented her each night? Back in the penthouse after the gala, Eloise mustered the courage to speak softly to him. "Tonight, you were different. I appreciate how you handled everything." Lucas shrugged off his suit jacket and said nothing for a long beat. Then, with a fleeting hint of regret, he confessed, "I'm not a monster, Eloise. There's a lot I can't forget." Before she could respond, he turned away, leaving her standing in the dimly lit foyer, with more questions than answers. Still, the hint of compassion in his words lingered, a rare sign that beneath his hardened exterior, there might still be a man capable of empathy. The thought gave her a glimmer of hope, even though she knew the punishments were far from over. Life took on a frenzied pace. Lucas buried himself in company matters, signing deals and negotiating new ventures to expand Harrington Enterprises. Eloise found herself juggling her charitable obligations, while also managing day-to-day tasks in the penthouse. The staff recognized her gentle nature and began to open up slightly. One housekeeper, Maria, mentioned Lucas's darker moods often worsened around anniversaries, his father's death, or certain business milestones that reminded him of the family legacy. During one particularly heavy rainstorm, lightning slashed the sky outside the penthouse windows, framing the city in stark contrast. The rumble of thunder seemed to echo Lucas's ever-present rage. That evening he came home well past midnight, drenched from the downpour, his expression carved from stone. Eloise, concerned, asked if he was all right. Lucas responded with a piercing stare. "We lost an important shipping contract today," he said flatly. "Your father struck a better deal with a rival company. We're at risk of losing millions." Eloise's heart dropped. She had no clue about the specifics of the shipping arrangement. Her father had never discussed it. She tried to offer consolation. "I can speak to him." "Don't bother." Lucas snapped water dripping from his hair. "He's doing this on purpose. This is how he exerts control, by dangling contracts, threatening to withdraw them unless I comply with his every demand. And you're just one more piece of leverage in his game." Stung. Eloise tried to remain calm. "I'm not leverage, Lucas. I'm your wife." His laugh was cold. "In name, yes. Do you think I can just forget how your father manipulated my family? How your inheritance ensures he has a stake in Harrington Enterprises? Every time I look at you, I see the noose around my neck tightening." Tears threatened to well up, but Eloise forced them down. "I had nothing to do with those deals. I want to help." His voice trembled with rage. "Help. The only help I need is for you and your father to stay out of my life." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the penthouse in a white glare. It struck Eloise in that instant that she was watching a man unraveling under colossal pressure. He was wounded perhaps more than she could understand, carrying guilt and fury that twisted him into someone unrecognizable. That night, she cried herself to sleep in the guest bedroom, not daring to join him in the master suite. Rain pummeled the windows as though nature itself raged in sympathy with Lucas's turmoil. In the coming days, the tension worsened. Board members grew anxious over the shipping fallout, and Eloise's father remained characteristically tight-lipped. The The staff walked on eggshells, whispering rumors about layoffs and lawsuits. Eloise sensed a crescendo building a moment when all the pain and anger would explode in a confrontation that neither she nor Lucas would be able to escape. And as fate would have it, that confrontation loomed on the horizon, hidden beneath a revelation she never could have predicted. Eloise found herself brooding for answers. Frustrated by Lucas's refusal to engage in a genuine conversation, she reached out to an old friend of the family, James Whitman, a retired lawyer who had served as an advisor to both the Harringtons and the Morgans for years. Over a cup of tea in his Upper West Side apartment, James hesitated before sharing what he knew. They were close, James said of Martin Harrington and Joseph Morgan, closer than most realize. Their business deals were always fair initially, but after Martin's death, Joseph moved fast. Some believed it was opportunistic. Others, like me, suspected there was more to it. Perhaps a promise he wanted to keep, or a responsibility he felt. What responsibility? Eloise asked, her mind racing. James sighed. I can't say for certain, but your father once confided in me that he owed a debt to Martin, something more personal than money. He never explained it fully, and I never pressed. But I do recall him mentioning the importance of you and Lucas being together. He said it was the only way to honor our promise. I assumed it was some vow they'd made when you two were children. Eloise left James's apartment with more questions than answers. Her father's silence and Lucas's accusations seemed two sides of a puzzle missing its central piece. That evening, she resolved to confront her father directly. She called Joseph Morgan at his estate, only to learn that he was leaving for a business trip to Singapore the next day. She demanded a meeting before he departed, so he reluctantly agreed to see her at Morgan Shipping's Manhattan office. Sitting in the office's grand reception room, a place with polished marble floors and towering sculptures, Eloise felt an unease swirl in the pit of her stomach. Her father appeared wearing a crisp grey suit, his usually warm eyes now guarded. Eloise, he greeted, voice laced with caution. What's so urgent? She breathed deeply. Father, I need the truth about the deal with the Harringtons. Lucas believes you manipulated them into this marriage and that you're now undermining his company. Is that true? Joseph Morgan's gaze shifted. There are layers to the situation. I never intended for you to be unhappy. That's not an answer, she insisted, frustration filling her voice. You keep secrets and I'm the one suffering in that penthouse. He punishes me every night thinking I'm your pawn. Her father paused, then murmured, I did what I had to do to protect both families. Martin and I had an understanding. He placed a hand on hers. Let me handle Lucas. I'll speak to him, set the record straight. But Eloise shook her head. No, I need to know exactly what I'm in the middle of. Reluctantly, he confessed that Martin Harrington had once saved his life during an industrial accident at a construction site in Newark. He pulled me out from under a collapsed beam. I was pinned, and if he hadn't risked himself, I'd be dead. When he passed away, I vowed to watch over Lucas like he watched over me. But Lucas's pride complicates everything. Stunned, Eloise absorbed his words. If her father's story was true, then Lucas had no clue of the depth of friendship between their fathers. Did that also connect to the debt her father mentioned to James Whitman? She pressed further, but Joseph Morgan only tightened his lips. Some matters are best left in the past, he concluded. Leaving her father's office, Eloise couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of a monumental discovery. One more secret, one more hidden truth might finally bring the entire tragedy into focus. Little did she know that the final puzzle piece had been with her all along, etched onto her skin. A birthmark she scarcely even remembered. Eloise sat curled in the corner of the penthouse library, the storm outside echoing the turbulence within her. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows like a metronome to her racing thoughts. A dim reading lamp cast a golden glow across open diaries and scattered letters. Claudia Harrington's looping cursive, delicate but urgent, filled the pages before her. Martin can't believe it, Eloise has an identical mark to the one he was born with. Her breath hitched as she read the line again. Claudia had seen the same crescent-shaped birthmark on Eloise that had marked Martin Harrington's shoulder since birth. The same birthmark Lucas bore faint memories of. The same one Eloise had grown up with, always assuming it was just a curious quirk of genetics. But now it was something more. Something that might hold the key to a history neither she nor Lucas fully understood. She leaned back in the leather chair, the weight of generations pressing on her. Was this what her father and Martin had kept secret? Was her marriage not a merger of companies, but a quiet binding of something much older and deeper? The memory returned her mother, brushing her hair as a child, humming softly. "You were born with a little moon on your back," her mother had said. "I always thought it meant you were special." Eloise hadn't thought of it in years, but now it felt like a puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. Across the penthouse, Lucas's voice drifted down the hall. Harsh clipped, he was on the phone again, likely with another executive panicking over the latest corporate tremor. The business was unraveling under pressure, and Lucas had been impossible since the fallout with her father. She heard the edge in his tone, heard how tightly he was holding himself together. A part of her ached for him. Another part ached from him. But this mystery, this birthmark, might change everything. Driven by a determination she barely recognized in herself, Eloise rose and retrieved Claudia's diaries, stacking them carefully in her arms. Then she slipped down the hall to Lucas's study, where a fire still smoldered in the hearth. The room was lined with shelves of old Harrington records, untouched for years. She set the diaries down and began to search. After an hour of rifling through dust-covered boxes, she found it a manila folder marked in her father's handwriting. Inside were letters exchanged between Joseph Morgan and Martin Harrington, a decade's worth of notes, business updates, and personal musings. Most were polite and formal, but one stood out. A letter penned by Martin read, "You saved me, Joe. I won't forget that night in Newark. The steel beam could have killed you, but you didn't hesitate. And now, with the way things are going, I trust you to look after Lucas if anything happens to me. He'll need you. And maybe he'll need her too." Eloise pressed a hand to her chest. Her father had never told her about an accident. He had never told her Martin had saved his life, or that he had promised to protect Lucas in return. It wasn't just a corporate pact. It was a vow between men, sealed in loyalty and sacrifice. She couldn't let this go unanswered. The next morning, before Lucas woke, Eloise placed a call to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. James Whitman, her late mother's trusted legal advisor and a longtime friend of both the Harrington and Morgan families. He agreed to meet her at his Upper West Side apartment that afternoon. The sun struggled through grey clouds as she stepped inside James's warm, cluttered space, lined with dusty law books and old family photographs. They were closer than most people knew, James said, settling into his chair with a soft sigh. "Martin and your father. I'd almost say, brothers in everything but blood." Eloise leaned forward. "Then why has everything become so twisted? Lucas thinks my father betrayed theirs." that I'm part of some grand manipulation. James hesitated, then spoke quietly. Martin saved Joseph's life. But Joseph gave him a future. After Martin's death, your father made sure Harrington Enterprises didn't collapse. People saw it as opportunism, but it wasn't. Joseph felt he owed Martin everything, and he made a promise to keep Lucas from ever feeling alone. She frowned. But what about the marriage? Why force that? James looked away. Joseph once told me the only way to honor the bond between them was to bring the families together permanently. He didn't believe in half measures, so they arranged everything. She whispered, Lucas and I were always just part of the plan. I don't think they meant it to hurt you, James said softly. But good intentions can still cause pain. Back in the penthouse that evening, Eloise sat in her father's study, surrounded by echoes of a legacy she never fully understood. She picked up a framed photo of her parents and Lucas's parents standing side by side at a gala, smiling like old friends. Not enemies, not rivals, just two families tied together by something no contract could ever define. She made the call. "Father," she said. When Joseph answered, "I know about the accident, about Martin, about the promise." There was silence on the other end. "I need to know why you kept it from me," she continued, "and why Lucas has spent our entire marriage believing he was your pawn." Joseph's voice was heavy with emotion. "Because I was afraid the truth would make things worse. I never imagined it would hurt you this way." She drew a breath. "No more hiding. If there's anything else I should know, I want it now. Because something's happening. Something tied to a mark I carry, and a story I don't fully understand." There was a long pause. Then, "Come see me. Tonight. Before I leave for Singapore." Eloise ended the call with her heart in her throat. She didn't know what she would find at Morgan Shipping's Manhattan headquarters, but she knew this: she would not live another day buried under someone else's secrets. The truth might still hurt, but it was the only way forward. And just beneath her shoulder blade, a birthmark tingled faintly, as if it too sensed what was coming. The tension in the penthouse had grown so thick it was hard to breathe. Each night stretched into a battlefield, Eloise trying to remain composed, Lucas growing colder and more volatile. Every conversation teetered on collapse. Every glance felt like a dagger. But beneath the chaos, Eloise held onto a single thread: the birthmark, the one she hadn't thought about in years. The one Claudia Harrington had called an angel's touch. And tonight that thread would unravel everything. Dinner had been a disaster. Lucas had stormed into the dining room, already angry. His firm had lost another client, and he suspected Joseph Morgan's influence. Eloise, trying to offer comfort, had only triggered more accusations. "You knew, didn't you?" Lucas snapped. "About your father's backdoor meetings with our investors. I didn't even know they existed," she fired back, her voice trembling not with fear, but fury. "Don't play innocent. You always play the victim, but you're as much a weapon in his hand as those contracts are." That was the final straw. Eloise shoved back her chair, the legs screeching against the marble floor. "Enough," she hissed. "I've taken your wrath, your blame, your cold punishments. But if you're going to keep accusing me, then you're going to have to face something real for once." Before he could react, she strode towards the fireplace and yanked off the silk robe draped around her shoulders, revealing the pale slip beneath. With a shaking hand, she turned around, pulling the fabric down just enough to expose her upper back. "Look at it," she said, voice hoarse. "The birthmark. Claudia wrote about it in her diaries. The exact same one your father had. The same shape, the same place. If you won't believe my words, then believe what's been written into my skin since the day I was born." Lucas froze. There, just beneath her left shoulder blade, was a small, distinct crescent-shaped mark. The air left his lungs. His gaze locked onto it, disbelief darkening into confusion, and then something deeper, fear. He stepped forward slowly, as if the room had shifted into a different gravity. With a trembling hand, he reached out his fingers, hovering above the mark, before gently pressing against it. The contact was electric. Not sensual, not possessive, but charged with the weight of something sacred. He saw it clearly now. Not just the mark, but the memory. A photograph. A beach trip. His father, Martin Harrington, shirtless in the summer sun, laughing beside a young Lucas. That same crescent birthmark visible just above his shoulder blade. The world tilted. Eloise turned around, eyes wide but unwavering. "Claudia called it fate," she whispered. "She said Martin believed I was connected to your family somehow. Not just through business, through blood, or something even stronger." Lucas staggered back a step. His voice cracked. Are you saying you're related to him?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But Claudia clearly thought it meant something, and your father, he insisted to mine that our marriage had to happen. Not for a merger, for something else." He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. "This doesn't make sense. My whole life I've been told your father forced this, that he preyed on us after the crash, that this marriage was just another noose." Eloise stepped closer. "Maybe your father and mine were trying to protect something, not destroy it. Maybe all these years you've been fighting the wrong war." The words hit like a thunderclap. Lucas turned away, pacing toward the window, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. For months he had nurtured his anger like a fire. He had used Eloise as a scapegoat, punishing her for sins that now seemed uncertain. His voice, when it returned, was hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Would you have listened?" she asked without accusation. Just honesty. He didn't respond. Instead, he crossed the room and disappeared into the study. Eloise remained standing, heart racing, unsure if she had just broken something or saved it. When he returned, Lucas was holding an old photo album. He flipped through pages until he found it, the beach photo. He held it up wordlessly. Eloise stepped close, peering at the picture. There it was. The mark. The same mark on Martin's shoulder that now lived on hers. "I thought I knew everything," Lucas murmured. "About my father, about your family, about you. But I don't. And if this—" He looked at her with eyes no longer hardened, but wounded. "If this is real, then maybe none of what I believed was true." Eloise swallowed, steadying her voice. "That mark didn't change overnight. It's always been there. Just like the truth. You just weren't ready to see it." He sank onto the edge of the couch, rubbing a hand over his face. The mask he'd worn for so long, the stoic, cold-hearted CEO was cracking. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he confessed. She moved beside him, keeping her distance, but sitting close enough that their silence became shared. "You don't have to figure it out in one night," she said. "But you have to stop punishing me for your pain." Lucas didn't speak again. He just nodded. For the first time in months, they sat in the same room, without a wall of rage between them. A fragile peace born not from forgiveness, yet but from recognition. Recognition that something far more profound had been buried beneath their hatred all along. The birthmark wasn't just a symbol of fate or legacy. It was a crack in the damn one that let the light in. The silence after the birthmark revelation was deafening. Lucas sat alone in the master bedroom, the weight of the moment pressing down like lead. The image of that crescent-shaped mark on Eloise's back burned into his mind. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. Every insult he had hurled, every night of cold contempt, it all unraveled in the shadow of that one fragile truth. Eloise had retreated to the guest room, exhausted from their confrontation. She didn't cry this time. She had none left to give. She simply stared at the ceiling, whispering the same question over and over. What does this mean for us now? The next morning, Lucas didn't storm off to work or retreat into his study like usual. Instead, he stood in the hallway, staring at a manila folder in his hands, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photographs, letters and newspaper clippings, mementos from a life before bitterness took root. He flipped through images of his father at various ages on a yacht with business partners, shaking hands at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, beaming beside a young Lucas in front of their old lake house. But one photo made his breath hitch. Martin Harrington, shirtless at a beach, laughing mid-run. There just beneath his left shoulder blade was the same crescent birthmark. Lucas's heart pounded. Claudia hadn't lied. She'd recorded it in her diaries with almost spiritual reverence. He remembered the entry Martin called it, an angel's touch, the mark of destiny. The same mark now existed on Eloise. But how? What was it supposed to mean? Driven by the storm brewing inside him, Lucas dug deeper. He scoured Claudia's diaries, some he hadn't opened since the funeral. Hidden in the folds of her last leather-bound journal, he found an odd entry. Martin always believed the universe tied us together in ways we can't fully understand. He saw Eloise as something sacred, a sign. He and Joseph made a promise, then one I never fully agreed with, but came to accept. Their bond, it was stronger than blood. Lucas reread the lines, stunned. His entire worldview, the carefully built tower of blame, began to collapse. That afternoon he skipped his meetings, cancelled calls, and simply wandered through the penthouse. The place felt different now, not just colder or quieter, but haunted by everything he'd failed to see. When Eloise returned from a meeting at the foundation, she was surprised to find him in the library, pacing. He turned to her eyes, weary. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. She hesitated. About what Lucas held up Claudia's diary and the photograph. "I've been wrong," he said, as if admitting it fractured something deep inside him. "So very wrong." Eloise moved closer, but said nothing, letting him continue. "I believed your father forced my family into submission. I believed you were part of that manipulation. But the truth..." He swallowed. "It's more complicated. Martin and Joseph. They weren't enemies. They were bonded in a way I didn't understand until now. I thought my pain justified everything I did. But I see now. I hurt you for no reason." Tears welled in her eyes. "You punished me for being a symbol of something I didn't choose." He stepped forward, anguish in every line of his face. "I'm sorry, Eloise. Truly. I was so angry at my father for dying, at your father for surviving." At you for being the one person I couldn't push away, no matter how hard I tried. But it wasn't your fault. You were never the enemy. She exhaled shakily. You've said terrible things to me, Lucas. Things I can't forget. I know, he whispered, eyes lowering. I won't ask you to forgive me. I just want you to know I see it now. All of it. And I want to change. There was a pause, deep, tender, painful. Then she spoke, her voice like a thread of wind. I don't want to run, but if we continue, it has to be different. It will be, he said quickly. No more resentment, no more silence. I want to learn who you are without all the shadows between us. That night, the penthouse felt like a different world. The air was still not with tension, but with possibility. They sat at the dinner table together for the first time in months. No bodyguards, no staff hovering. Just two people trying to understand what came next. The following days unfolded like a cautious rebirth. Lucas invited Eloise to explore the old family archives with him. They read letters from Martin to Joseph, some business-related others, almost poetic in tone, speaking of dreams for their children, of bridging their families with purpose, not power. In one letter, Martin wrote, If anything happens to me, I trust Joseph to keep my son from becoming bitter. Bitterness is poison. Let the children grow in loyalty and truth, not ambition. Lucas read the line aloud, and then looked up at Eloise. I became what he feared, he admitted. But you never gave up. Eloise reached for his hand. I didn't know what we were fighting for. But maybe now we can figure it out. Together. The change didn't come overnight, but it came. Lucas cancelled his regular poker nights and late-night bar meetings. He came home early, took calls in the same room as her, asked about her day. Eloise, in turn, began leaving the guest room door open. Slowly, they met in the space between wounds and forgiveness. One evening, they stood together by the penthouse's enormous window overlooking the skyline. This city has seen every version of me, Lucas murmured, but I hope it sees a better one now. Eloise leaned into him. One day at a time. The mark on her back, once just a mystery, had become a turning point. Not because of what it revealed, but because of what it inspired. Humility, healing, and the kind of redemption that no business deal or family alliance could manufacture. Their story had cracked open, and now for the first time, they had a chance to write a new one. In the weeks that followed the revelation of the birthmark, a slow but undeniable shift settled over the Harrington penthouse. The bitter air of resentment and punishment was replaced by something tenuous but unmistakable hope. The walls, once echoing with icy silence and cutting words, now bore witness to small, hesitant steps toward healing. Lucas, haunted by the weight of what he had done, began to make amends. He apologized first to the staff, acknowledging the storm of tension he had unleashed on the household. He met each person with sincerity, asking for patience as he worked to become someone better. For the first time since their wedding, Eloise saw glimpses of the man behind the CEO. Mask. The man burdened by grief, pride, and misunderstanding, now trying to lay down his sword. He no longer retreated to his study after dinner, or sat through meals in stony silence. Instead, he invited Eloise to dine with him to talk, even if the conversations were at first awkward and clipped. On some evenings, they shared stories from childhood. Eloise spoke of simpler days spent sailing with her cousins in the Hamptons. Lucas shared how he used to ride his bike along the Hudson River Trail with his father, before Martin's business swallowed all his free time. It wasn't perfect. Eloise remained guarded her trust, not so easily restored. The emotional bruises were still fresh. Yet each day brought a new effort from Lucas, small but deliberate gestures that showed his intentions had changed. He started leaving handwritten notes with her morning tea. "Good luck at the foundation luncheon." Or, "You looked beautiful last night." These weren't grand declarations, but they were a start. Lucas also began bringing her into his world, not as a token wife for appearances, but as a voice he respected. At a Harrington Enterprises strategy meeting, he surprised the board by inviting Eloise to join. Some raised eyebrows, but Lucas stood firm. "She has insight that's valuable," he said simply. And Eloise, though nervous, contributed calmly and intelligently. Afterward, he told her, "You handled them better than I did." Encouraged by this progress, Eloise reached out to her father. They met for a private lunch where she gently but firmly explained the harm his secrecy had caused. To her surprise, Joseph Morgan didn't defend himself. He listened. And when she asked him to be transparent with Lucas moving forward, he nodded solemnly. "It's time I stopped treating him like a rival," he said, and started treating him like family. A few weeks later, Lucas proposed a trip, just the two of them, to the old Harrington estate in Connecticut. It was a place he had long avoided, steeped in memories of his father's absence and his own resentment. But this time, he wanted to confront those ghosts, not run from them. The estate was still majestic, despite years of neglect. The wide veranda overlooked green pastures framed by old oak trees. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. They wandered the halls together, rediscovering a space frozen in time. In one upstairs bedroom, Eloise found a forgotten music box. Its lacquer cracked the ballerina inside, still twirling to a soft lullaby. The box had once belonged to her mother, gifted by Martin, inscribed simply, "For the woman who believed in our dream." In the study, Lucas unearthed a stack of letters Martin had never sent, notes full of hope about the joint ventures he and Joseph Morgan envisioned. In one, Martin wrote, "Our children will carry this forward, Joe. They'll do better than we did." Lucas read the words aloud, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, Eloise saw tears in his eyes. That night, as the sun dipped behind the estate's rolling hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, they stood in the garden together. The grass was damp from morning rain, the scent of lilac heavy in the air. Lucas took her hand, hesitantly, reverently. "I used to think this marriage was a prison," he admitted, voice low. "But now I wonder if it was the only way I'd ever learn the truth, and the only way I'd ever meet you, not the version I made up in my mind, but the real you." Eloise didn't answer right away. She squeezed his hand, letting the silence between them stretch into something comforting instead of charged. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe we were meant to rewrite the ending our fathers never could." Back at the manor, they settled into the grand old library. Eloise curled beside him on the couch, her head resting lightly on his shoulder as the fire crackled before them. Lucas traced the edge of her hand with his thumb, his movements gentle, deliberate. "Whatever comes next," he said, "I want to face it with you." "For us," she replied softly, echoing the words he had spoken once before. "Not for them. For us." Their road ahead would not be easy. Scars remained, and some wounds would take time to heal. But for the first time since their wedding day, the future didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a beginning. The story of Lucas Harrington and Eloise Morgan reminds us that sometimes the darkest paths lead us toward the brightest revelations. Their marriage began as a brittle contract hollow vows spoken beneath the scrutiny of corporate ambition. Yet beneath the layers of anger and misunderstanding lay hidden truths that transcended any mere business alliance. A single birthmark shattered their illusions, unveiling legacies of loyalty and sacrifice. When hatred became empathy, the bonds that once threatened to destroy them began to heal. If you were moved by the twists and turns in their journey, Cassandra Montgomery's heart thumped in her chest as she stepped into the hushed courtroom. Swollen with her unborn child, she held her chin high, determined not to show weakness. Across the aisle, perched confidently on a bench, sat Juliet Hastings, the stunning mistress of Cassandra's millionaire husband. An insidious, knowing smile curled on Juliet's lips. Everyone sensed the tension crackling like static in the air. But no one suspected how drastically everything would shift when the medical file came into play. In that moment, two women's lives, one heavily pregnant, the other glowing with rumors of her own pregnancy, were about to collide. No one was prepared for the truth that ultrasound would reveal. The trajectory of Cassandra Montgomery's life had always seemed predestined for elegance and abundance. Born into the famous Lancaster family in Atlanta, heiresses known for their philanthropic acts and exclusive business ventures, Cassandra was raised with the fine polish of Southern charm and contemporary ambition. Her father, Charles Lancaster, once sat on the boards of multiple high-profile corporations, while her mother, Evelyn Lancaster, arranged extravagant charity galas that raised millions. For Cassandra, splendor was a birthright, and yet she never let it dampen her sense of empathy. She volunteered at soup kitchens from the age of 14, and later began her own charity for underprivileged women pursuing higher education. Her path intersected with Richard Montgomery, the charismatic son of real estate tycoon Thomas Montgomery, at a black tie fundraiser for one of her mother's charities. Tall with dark hair, brushed back in a sleek style. Richard had a wide smile that could placate even the most skeptical heart. He had approached her with an air of confident humility, an uncommon mixture in the circles they frequented. Over a glass of sparkling champagne, they bonded over their shared desire to use their inheritance for good. Before the night ended, they'd already made arrangements to see one another again. In the months and years that followed, the couple became unstoppable. After a picture-perfect wedding at an Italian villa overlooking Lake Como, the Montgomerys soared to new financial heights. Richard, a talented deal-maker, launched a real estate empire with ambitious projects that saw profits balloon at unimaginable rates. Cassandra, meanwhile, continued her philanthropic work, winning hearts with her sincere devotion to community upliftment. But beneath the veneer of glamour, hidden storms brewed. Their circle was rife with envy, ambition, and temptation. Endless lines of people lured by wealth, power, and the glamour of the Montgomery name sought to attach themselves to the couple. Their love was genuine, yet the pressures were gargantuan. It would only take a single thread to unravel the tapestry. It began innocently, rumors whispered among the staff about a woman seen leaving Richard's office building late at night. Then the mention of a private lunch at an upscale bistro with an unknown brunette. The household staff, fiercely loyal to Cassandra, did what they could to shield her from the swirling whispers. But news has a way of seeping through cracks. At first, Cassandra brushed off the concerns. She had faith in Richard, the man she had built her life around. They had always communicated well. Open honesty was their bedrock. She refused to believe that the man who gave so much to their marriage would risk it all for a fleeting dalliance. Yet as the rumors continued to pile up, photographs, hushed gossip, even a paparazzi shot outside a luxurious spa, her confidence wavered. One afternoon, after an uncomfortable moment at a charity luncheon, where an acquaintance hinted at Richard's dinner guest, Cassandra confronted him. He seemed genuinely perplexed by her questions, offering quick reassurances. "It's business," he said. "She's just a potential investor. We're working on a complex project, Cass. I'd never keep something truly important from you." Cassandra believed him, or at least wanted to, but she couldn't help noticing the slight tremble in his voice. That was the first night she slept with an ache of doubt in her heart. As the weeks wore on, the staff observed Richard spending more nights at his office, citing that deals with international clients kept him awake into the early morning hours. His phone calls grew more secretive. Cassandra's attempts to connect emotionally were often met with feigned attentiveness. The gradual distance between them felt like a glacier forming cold, massive, and unstoppable. When Cassandra finally discovered the name Juliet Hastings, it wasn't because of a direct confession from Richard or an enlightening slip of the tongue from her acquaintances. Instead, it came in the form of a monogrammed scarf discreetly left in the passenger seat of Richard's BMW. Cassandra found it while retrieving some files she needed from the car. Her heart lurched as she read the embroidered initials JH on the expensive satin. She confronted him that very evening. In the living room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's twinkling skyline, Cassandra's voice quavered, caught between anger and heartbreak. "Who is Juliet Hastings?" she asked, her eyes scanning Richard's face for any hint of honesty. Richard hesitated. His gaze flickered away. Then, in halting words, he revealed that Juliet was a potential investor from Europe, an heiress who wanted to expand into the lucrative US real estate market. He claimed everything was strictly business. The scarf was an unintentional leftover after he had given her a ride to finalize some details. But Cassandra's instincts screamed that this was more than business. Richard was too defensive, his body language too stiff. Whether he was entangled in a deep affair or simply flirting with the possibility was unclear. But one thing was certain: her marriage was in jeopardy. She excused herself and retreated to their bedroom, mind racing with worry and heartbreak. It was only the next morning that Richard confided a deeper truth. "Juliet might have feelings for me," he admitted, "but I've never pursued anything more than a business relationship." He confessed that he was flattered by her attention, especially during challenging times. He insisted that no lines had been crossed. Cassandra offered him a final chance at trust. "If there is anything more than business I need to know," she said quietly, "I need you to be sure you're choosing our marriage." He swore he was committed to her, and for a moment, Cassandra dared to hope that the worst had passed. Just weeks after the scarf incident, an announcement from Cassandra seemed to reset the clock on their marriage. She was pregnant. The news brought both joy and anxiety in equal measure. Cassandra had always dreamed of having a family with Richard. She imagined bringing their baby into a world of warmth and love. Perhaps she thought this pregnancy would guide them back to each other. She believed motherhood would anchor her soul, giving her renewed purpose even as her marriage faced unseen challenges. Richard's reaction was guarded excitement. Initially, he beamed, hugging Cassandra and proclaiming the child would bring them closer. But something in his expression suggested concern. Cassandra attributed it to the stress of fatherhood. Everyone in their circle celebrated the news, from her philanthropic friends to her parents, Charles and Evelyn, who had long awaited the birth of their first grandchild. A fleeting sense of marital bliss hovered in the Montgomery mansion. They planned doctor's appointments, pored over baby name lists, and teased each other about the baby's gender. For those few weeks, it felt like the threat of Juliet Hastings had evaporated. That illusion shattered one brisk winter morning. A letter-plain envelope typed words arrived at the mansion. Cassandra retrieved it from the mail before the staff. The message was alarmingly brief. "Your husband is lying. Check his phone messages or you'll never know the truth." There was no signature, no return address. Cassandra's hands shook as she held the letter. She looked around, half expecting to see a shadowy figure in the halls. Tension coiled in her stomach. That very night, while Richard showered, curiosity overwhelmed her. Despite the guilt knotting in her chest, she unlocked his phone. Confusion twisted into horror as she read the messages, romantic flirtations between Richard and Juliet, confessions of longing, a mention of clandestine meetings in luxurious hotels. The heartbreak was almost too much to bear. Then she spotted something truly shocking. Juliet was proclaiming she was pregnant as well. Cassandra felt the walls of her world crumble in an instant. She dropped the phone, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Somewhere in the house, water from the shower continued to run. Her heart pounded so loudly, she wondered if Richard could hear it. Another wave of sickness rushed through her part pregnancy and part raw betrayal. She fled the room just as Richard stepped out of the shower. Locking herself in the guest suite, she scrolled through those messages again, eyes tearing up at the lines that confirmed intimacy. Yet she forced herself to read everything. In the most recent exchange, Juliet had written, "I missed my period. The doctor says I'm pregnant. You wanted an heir. Now you have one." She could hardly believe this was her life. Everything felt surreal, like a poorly scripted melodrama. But it was all very real, and the emotional pain was suffocating. Over the next days, Cassandra avoided Richard with well-timed errands and pleas of exhaustion. She needed clarity before confronting him. She needed to know if Juliet was truly pregnant or using the claim as a bargaining chip. Cassandra decided the best approach was to gather evidence. She reached out to her family friend, Avery Johnson, a private investigator at Johnson & Walters Investigations. Avery had once worked on sensitive corporate cases, uncovering everything from espionage to personal blackmail. If anyone could sift through the facts, it was her. Avery Johnson carried herself with calm competence. She had grown up alongside Cassandra, and the two had once bonded over a summer job at a boutique law firm. So when Cassandra explained her suspicions through hushed phone calls, Avery reassured her. "We'll find out the truth, Cass, and we'll handle it discreetly." For 2 weeks, Avery discreetly followed Juliet Hastings, compiled records, interviewed local staff at hotels. The findings were catastrophic. Photos of Richard entering Juliet's penthouse at odd hours, charges on his corporate card for lavish dinners, plus flight logs that matched both their schedules to the same exotic destinations. The evidence left no doubt that an affair was ongoing. Even worse, Avery discovered that Juliet had indeed visited an obstetrics clinic, presumably confirming her pregnancy. The detective had no idea whether the father was definitely Richard, but it was enough to confirm that this was no empty threat. Meanwhile, Cassandra's anguish hardened into resolve. The child in her womb felt like the only pure thing in her life, an innocent soul she must protect. She sensed that confronting Richard would lead to more half-truths and manipulation. A voice in her head reminded her of her own identity. Cassandra Lancaster Montgomery, strong, philanthropic, born into a legacy of resilience. She wouldn't crumble now. Late one evening, after pacing the floor for hours, Cassandra decided to speak to an attorney. She needed guidance. They met clandestinely in a law office on the other side of the city, where she learned that if Juliet was truly pregnant and demanded recognition or inheritance for her child, a messy legal war could ensue one that might jeopardize Cassandra's own unborn baby's stake in the Montgomery Empire. Worst of all, it could further damage Cassandra's emotional well-being. The lavish circles in which the Montgomerys moved were no strangers to scandal. However, this one rocked them all. It began with an online gossip column that published rumors of Richard's affair, accompanied by grainy photos of him leaving an exclusive restaurant with Juliet. A fury of speculation erupted. Some called it malicious rumor-mongering. Others insisted it was undeniable proof. Cassandra's phone lit up with messages from worried friends, opportunistic journalists and acquaintances seeking gossip. Each ping felt like another dagger in her chest. Richard attempted damage control, but his method, clumsy denials and blaming the media only fueled suspicions. Soon Juliet herself spoke to a reporter from a scandal-seeking tabloid, declaring she was pregnant with Richard's child. "I love him," she said with a sweet smile. "I only hope we can raise this baby together." That interview was the final straw. Cassandra refused to remain silent any longer. She released a brief public statement, confirming her own pregnancy, pleading for privacy, and stating that she was evaluating the situation. The statement read calm on the surface, but behind it lay heartbreak and steely determination. As the story spread, Cassandra received an unexpected phone call from none other than Juliet Hastings. The mistress demanded they meet. Confused and curious, Cassandra agreed, if only to look her rival in the eyes. They arranged to see each other in a private lounge at the Regency Hotel, one of Richard's prized properties. The lounge was empty, save for the bartender, who discreetly kept his distance after serving them. Cassandra arrived first, wearing a tailored black dress that hinted at her pregnancy. Juliet breezed in moments later, clad in a chic designer gown that hugged her slender frame. Her delicate features were overshadowed by an expression that combined triumph and a trace of anxiety. "Thank you for coming," Juliet said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I believe we can settle this amicably." Cassandra leveled her gaze, ignoring the swirl of conflicting emotions. "Amicably? You destroyed my marriage." A subtle smirk tugged at the corner of Juliet's mouth. "I gave Richard what he wanted," she said softly. "I'm sorry if it hurt you, but I'm carrying his child too." The minutes that followed were excruciating. Cassandra listened as Juliet explained she had no intention of backing down. "Richard promised me everything. The wealth, the position. Even a future for our baby," she claimed. "I know you'll probably file for divorce, but let's think about the children involved. We don't have to tarnish their inheritance with an ugly battle. We can come to an agreement that benefits everyone." Cassandra almost laughed out loud at the audacity, but the tears brimming in her eyes betrayed how deeply Juliet's words cut. She found the mistress's confidence disturbing, and yet the proposition was so coldly pragmatic that Cassandra recognized a cunning mind. Juliet might be a gold digger, but she was no fool. She had singled out Richard for his fortune and influence, and she had no qualms about using her unborn child as leverage. Despite her sorrow, Cassandra refused to wilt in front of her adversary. She straightened her posture, energy pulsing within her. "Any child of Richard's deserves recognition," she said, voice calm. "But don't think I'll let you manipulate me. My baby and I come first." With that, Cassandra stood to leave, fully aware that Juliet wore a smug, victorious smile. One thing became clear. This affair wasn't merely an emotional betrayal. It was a threat to her family's legacy and her unborn child's future. When Cassandra returned home, Richard was pacing in the living room, phone pressed to his ear. As soon as he saw her, he ended the call, stepping forward with a concerned expression. "Cassandra." "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I've been trying to reach you." She dropped her purse onto the sofa and pinned him with an intense stare. "I met Juliet," she said, letting the statement hover in the silent air. Richard's face drained of color. What did she say?" Cassandra shook her head in disbelief. "She claims you promised her everything that you were planning, a life with her, including the baby." Her voice cracked. "Tell me, Richard, how long have you been deceiving me?" He stumbled over a response, his eyes desperate. "Cass, it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. I let myself get swept up in the thrill. But I never meant to hurt you. I was going to end it." He ran his hand through his hair. "Juliet's pregnancy was unexpected. She caught me off guard. Yet you still kept seeing her." Cassandra's tone was flat, her sorrow overshadowed by anger. "There's no undoing the damage." "Now is it Isedio?" Over the next hours they argued in circles. Richard insisted he loved Cassandra and would do whatever was necessary to repair their marriage. She demanded he stop seeing Juliet, set up a legal plan for child support, if the baby was indeed his, and hand over full transparency bank accounts, phone logs, everything. Caught between guilt and fear, he acquiesced to each demand, promising full cooperation. But Cassandra remained unconvinced. His affair had stretched on for too long, and Juliet was cunning enough to keep twisting the knife. In a matter of days, everything escalated. Cassandra's lawyer drew up documents to protect her interests, while Juliet hired her own high-powered legal team to assert her claims. Rumors swirled that Juliet was pushing for a generous settlement, threatening to go public with even more scandalous details if the Montgomerys didn't comply. Into this maelstrom stepped the ironically calm figure of Judge Harriet Bennett, the presiding judge, who would later oversee the complicated lawsuit. She was known in high society for her impartiality and no-nonsense approach. The tension soared when the judge summoned them to a preliminary hearing to address custody rights, paternity tests, and financial disputes. Cassandra had hoped to resolve the situation without stepping into a courtroom, but Juliet's relentless pursuit of recognition for her unborn child left no alternative. In the days leading up to the hearing, Cassandra oscillated between heartbreak and fierce protectiveness. Every time she felt the baby move within her, her resolve hardened. She told her lawyer, "No matter what happens in that courtroom, my baby must come first." She also prepared herself for the possibility that she'd become a single mother if the only way to save her dignity was to divorce Richard once and for all. It was a spectacle when Cassandra, visibly pregnant, walked into the courtroom on the day of the preliminary hearing. Heads turned as her presence radiated both vulnerability and strength. Richard trailed behind, looking as though he'd aged years from stress and guilt. On the opposite side of the aisle, Juliet Hastings sat with a demure air, impeccably dressed in designer attire that barely hinted at her own pregnancy. She offered a thin, self-assured smile to Cassandra across the courtroom, a smile that felt like poison dipped in honey. The hearing began. Judge Bennett's gaze swept across the parties, her well-practiced neutrality concealing any personal judgment. Juliet's attorney, a smooth-talking professional named Daniel Rothstein, presented his client's side. She was in a relationship with Richard Montgomery, who had fathered her child, and she was seeking confirmation of paternity, financial support, and even partial recognition in the Montgomery estate. Cassandra's attorney, Melissa Walters, countered that any financial arrangement should await confirmation of paternity. Moreover, she pointed out that Cassandra, the legal wife, was also pregnant with Richard's child and had rightful claims of her own. As the legal dance continued, tensions soared. The judge ordered paternity testing for Juliet's pregnancy once the fetus reached a certain stage, reminding everyone that final rulings would only come after concrete evidence. In the interim, an arrangement for potential prenatal medical expenses and partial living costs might be necessary to safeguard Juliet's health. The hearing ended with a swirl of questions unanswered. Stepping out of the courtroom, Cassandra felt both relief at having advanced the process and dread at the knowledge that nothing was resolved. The cameras outside the courthouse snapped incessantly. She clutched Richard's arm for support, though she barely trusted him anymore. Juliet left through another door, accompanied by her lawyer, but not before casting that insidious smile again. In the aftermath, Cassandra found herself leaning on unexpected allies. Socialite friends who typically relished gossip now rallied to her side, supporting her with quiet lunches and words of affirmation. One friend, Samantha Holland, organized a fundraiser for Cassandra's Women's Scholarship Program and used the event to quell rumors. "We stand by Cassandra," she declared in front of the press. "She's a woman of class, generosity, and unwavering strength." In addition, Cassandra's parents Charles and Evelyn Lancaster stepped in with unwavering emotional and financial backing. Charles expressed quiet rage at Richard's betrayal, but focused on protecting his daughter's interests. He authorized the Lancasters' legal counsel to support Cassandra if necessary. "No one will mistreat my daughter," he vowed, making it evident that the Lancaster influence still carried significant weight in Atlanta's elite circles. Meanwhile, Avery Johnson's investigative prowess remained critical. She uncovered that Juliet had a history of targeting affluent men, though never with such success. A handful of minor lawsuits from previous entanglements hinted that she was no stranger to manipulative methods. Cassandra felt vindicated, but also uneasy. She realized she was up against a professional manipulator, someone who'd stop at nothing to secure her fortune. Amid the rising tension, Richard found himself ostracized by many peers. Associates who had admired his business acumen now distanced themselves, unsettled by the scandal. Even within his own family, he faced condemnation. His father, Thomas Montgomery, known for controlling the family's substantial holdings, expressed profound disappointment. "You had everything Thomas told his son, and you threw it away for a fling. If this ordeal harms our empire, it's on you." The harsh words forced Richard into a period of reflection. He alternated between frantic apologies to Cassandra and desperate efforts to salvage his business reputation. Sleepless nights spent in his office had him reevaluating decisions that led to this crisis. While his remorse seemed sincere, trust was difficult to rebuild. He promised Cassandra he would sever all romantic ties with Juliet, but the damage to her was near irreparable. She saw glimpses of the man she once loved, yet the memory of those texts and clandestine hotel visits lingered like an open wound. Just when Cassandra believed matters couldn't get more complicated, rumors surfaced that Juliet was preparing to release a tell-all interview. Supposedly, she intended to share private emails, pictures, and even a rumored love letter from Richard. The tabloids were salivating for new angles, and some unscrupulous journalists began harassing Cassandra about her plans for motherhood amid the scandal. It was during this relentless barrage of rumors and stress that Cassandra experienced abdominal pains one afternoon. Terrified for her baby, she rushed to the emergency room. Doctors assured her it was merely stress-induced cramping. They recommended she reduce her anxiety to protect her pregnancy. As she lay in the hospital bed, tubes attached to her arm, Cassandra realized she had to fight not just for her mental well-being, but for the life of her unborn child. She resolved that no matter what it took, she would not allow Juliet's manipulations or the paparazzi's intrusions to jeopardize her pregnancy. A few days after Cassandra's hospital scare, the second courtroom hearing loomed. This time it was more formal, with both sides set to present evidence about finances, alleged promises, and any demands that might shape the eventual settlement. Stepping into the courtroom, Cassandra felt an icy dread. Juliet was already seated wearing a fitted dress that did more to accentuate her now visible bump. She shot Cassandra a quick smile, a toxic blend of confidence and condescension. Richard looked like a man facing a firing squad, tension etched into every line of his face. The proceedings started routinely, attorneys discussing medical bills and required deposits for Juliet's prenatal care. Then Juliet's attorney claimed that Richard had promised her not just child support, but a stake in future real estate projects under the Montgomery umbrella, a notion that made Cassandra's attorney bristle with skepticism. But the turning point came mid-session, when Juliet, under oath, testified that her doctor had identified potential complications in her pregnancy. She presented a sealed envelope containing ultrasound results and medical assessments. A hush fell as she explained that she needed immediate confirmation of paternal responsibility to ensure her fragile condition received the specialized medical attention it required, and that the Montgomery family would foot the bill. Cassandra watched the drama unfold, unsure whether Juliet was exaggerating or if real complications threatened the baby's health. Either way, it painted Juliet as a sympathetic figure, potentially swaying the judge's perspective. Cassandra could almost feel the narrative shifting. As Juliet handed her ultrasound findings over to the judge, Cassandra caught a glimpse of her face, a serene, almost triumphant expression. Juliet glanced in Cassandra's direction, that same lethal smile curling on her lips. The effect was chilling. It carried a message: I hold the power now. Cassandra's heart pounded. She told herself not to panic. Yet the swirl of possible outcomes rattled her composure. What if the judge forced immediate financial compensation? What if Richard was pressured to publicly acknowledge Juliet's pregnancy, overshadowing Cassandra's own maternal journey? The hearing continued mechanically, with discussions about how the court would handle evidence of paternity down the line. But Cassandra was only half listening. She felt like a woman trapped in a nightmare, with each new revelation twisting the knife deeper. Meanwhile, Richard sat motionless occasionally, casting apologetic glances at Cassandra that did little to ease her suffering. Later that afternoon, after the hearing ended, Cassandra's lawyer approached her with a perplexed expression. "They gave us a copy of Juliet's ultrasound," Melissa Walters said quietly. "You should probably see this." The attorney led Cassandra to a private antechamber. There she handed over a file with black and white sonogram images and a written medical evaluation from one Elaine Porter at Atlanta Women's Clinic. Cassandra's pulse quickened as she scanned through the documents, her mind snagging on unfamiliar medical terms. At first glance, the ultrasound images looked like any normal pregnancy scan. She saw what might be the outline of a fetus, but she lacked the expertise to interpret the finer details. However, the final page revealed a crucial piece of data. The embryonic age was listed at around 8 weeks. Cassandra mentally counted backward. 8 weeks from the present date would have placed Juliet's conception timeline at a moment that coincidentally Richard was supposedly overseas on a business trip in Europe. She herself had records of him calling nightly from Italy's Lombardy region. Could the timing be off? Cassandra's suspicions flared. The window for Juliet's pregnancy didn't perfectly align with Richard's known schedule. Either the dates were miscalculated, or someone was lying. Cassandra texted Avery Johnson immediately. Need you to look at these dates. This might be bigger than we thought." As the next few days ticked by, Cassandra's life became a blur of anxious waiting. She woke up each morning to a swirl of phone calls, social media gossip, and intrusive questions about the scandal. She hardly slept. Meanwhile, Avery Johnson dived into the new lead cross-referencing Richard's travel logs, with the probable date of conception indicated by Juliet's ultrasound. Finally, Avery delivered a discreet call. "Cass, the timeline doesn't match up," she stated firmly. Based on airline records, Richard left Atlanta on the 10th of last month and didn't return until the 21st. The medical report suggests conception likely occurred around the 15th. If that's accurate, there's no way Richard could be the father unless the ultrasound is inaccurate or there's some other factor we're missing. Cassandra felt a surge of hope, a possibility that her nightmare might be an elaborate sham. But Avery cautioned, "We can't jump to conclusions yet. Ultrasound dating can have a margin of error. We need more conclusive evidence." Haunted by possibilities, Cassandra took a bold step. She requested her attorney to set up a meeting with Dr. Elaine Porter, the OB-GYN, named on Juliet's documents. Legally, Dr. Porter wouldn't be able to disclose much about Juliet's case without explicit permission, but Cassandra believed she might glean subtle clues just by speaking with her. When Cassandra arrived at the well-appointed Atlanta Women's Clinic, she felt the baby in her own womb give a gentle nudge. It was a reminder that she too needed to protect herself and her child. In Dr. Porter's office, a nurse politely informed Cassandra that patient confidentiality would limit what could be shared. Cassandra explained that she had no intention of prying into details, but she worried about the potential father's confusion regarding the timeline. She asked hypothetical questions about how ultrasound dating worked, whether stress or medical conditions could alter the gestational age assessment. Dr. Porter, a composed woman in her early 50s, maintained her professionalism. "Typically, the dating is fairly accurate. We always advise follow-up ultrasounds for confirmation. Margins of error exist, of course, but not usually more than a week or so." Cassandra left Dr. Porter's office more convinced than ever that something was off about Juliet's timeline. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of empowerment. Perhaps the devastating betrayal wasn't as it seemed. Maybe Juliet had manipulated the truth, forging a path to wealth by using Richard's name. Avery Johnson's investigative momentum didn't stop at the travel logs. She dug deeper into Juliet's personal history, uncovering a trail of short-lived relationships with other affluent men. None had escalated to pregnancy, but Avery found faint echoes of similar patterns. Illusions of closeness, promises financial demands, culminating in hushed settlements. This time it seemed Juliet had landed a bigger target, the Montgomery Empire. Avery eventually retrieved an alarming snippet of info. Juliet had visited a different clinic around the time she first announced her pregnancy. That clinic, Maplewood Diagnostics, provided discreet reproductive services. She might have sought alternative fertility treatments or simply inquired about a procedure. But the potential link raised another question. Was Juliet actually pregnant with someone else's baby? Or was she using medical records to craft a false narrative? Though Cassandra was still furious with Richard for his affair, her instincts told her that not everything was as Juliet claimed. Armed with Avery's findings, Cassandra prepared for the next court hearing with renewed determination. She was done playing victim in Juliet's chess game. When the next hearing convened, everyone expected more arguments over finances and paternity. But Cassandra's attorney, Melissa Walters, stunned the courtroom with new evidence. She displayed 2 sets of ultrasound images, one from Juliet's official file, another from Maplewood Diagnostics. The second set had been leaked anonymously to Avery. The fetal measurements on the Maplewood images indicated a gestational age far beyond 8 weeks, closer to 13 weeks. If both sets truly belonged to Juliet Hastings, it meant she had deliberately provided conflicting data to the court. Juliet's eyes widened in alarm. She shot up from her seat, attempting to interrupt the proceedings. Her attorney rushed to object, claiming the second set of ultrasounds were unverified and illegally obtained. Melissa countered that they'd soon subpoena Maplewood Diagnostics for authenticity. Judge Bennett, typically calm, showed visible frustration at the revelation. She demanded an explanation from Juliet's counsel, who fumbled for a coherent response. This was the pivotal moment. If it turned out that Juliet was further along in her pregnancy than Wu claimed, or if the baby's father was someone else entirely, it would change everything. The court erupted in murmurs while reporters frantically typed updates. Juliet appeared furious, her composure unraveling under the glare of scrutiny. During a recess, Juliet stormed out into the hallway, followed by her attorney. The press seized the moment. Cameras flashing microphones thrust forward. Cassandra remained inside, but from her vantage point, she could see Juliet's frantic gestures. Tension in the corridor sizzled like live wires. Richard, pale and shaken by the bombshell evidence, approached Cassandra. "Is it true?" he asked, voice trembling. "Could her timeline be off? Could this child not be mine?" Cassandra's response was frosty. "You should have thought about that before you stepped out on our marriage." She paused, swallowing back months of rage. "But if it means you aren't trapped by her scheme, then I want the truth to come out. My child won't share an inheritance with a con artist's fabricated claims." When court resumed, Judge Bennett demanded that all medical records relating to Juliet's pregnancy be submitted directly to the court under seal. Further, she ordered an immediate non-invasive paternity test once feasible. The tension in the room was so thick you could practically taste it. Juliet's attorney tried to salvage the situation, insisting that simple misunderstandings had led to conflicting medical data. But the damage was already done. Suspicion now hung heavily over Juliet's story. In the following days, a hush fell over the case as everyone awaited the results of the paternity test. Cassandra tried to refocus on her own pregnancy, scheduling a checkup with her obstetrician, Dr. Lana Brooks. This time, Richard joined her, eager to show support. The ultrasound technician turned the screen toward them, revealing a strong heartbeat and the tiny shape of their growing child. For a moment, they were just a couple, marveling at the creation of life. Cassandra felt tears well up, a mixture of joy and heartbreak for what their marriage could have been. Outside the hospital, Richard asked if they could talk. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began, "but I'll do anything to fix this, Cass. I want to be there for you and our child. Please just say there's a chance." Cassandra hesitated. She thought about the late-night phone calls, the humiliating tabloids, the acid-like pain of betrayal. Yet she also saw the man she'd once loved, contrite and frightened. "I can't give you an answer right now," she said softly. "But our baby deserves both parents if you truly mean to change." At last, the day arrived when the non-invasive paternity test results would be unveiled. Lawyers from both sides convened at the courthouse. Cassandra, Richard, and Juliet were present, each tense in their own way. Judge Bennett, with stern composure, opened the sealed envelope from the lab. Her eyes scanned the document before she spoke. "Regarding the unborn child carried by Ms. Juliet Hastings, the probability that Richard Montgomery is the biological father is—" She paused, letting the tension peak. 0%. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Juliet jumped to her feet, her face a mask of panic. "That's impossible," she shrieked. "The test must be wrong. He's the father. We were together." But the paternity test was conclusive. There was no chance Richard was the father of Juliet's baby. The carefully orchestrated narrative she had spun for months collapsed in an instant. Judge Bennett's tone turned crisp. "Ms. Hastings, this court does not look kindly on deception. Your previous testimony included statements that appear to be false. I will be investigating potential perjury charges." Juliet sank back into her seat, her face blanching. Reporters rushed out of the room to break the scandalous news. Cassandra felt her entire body tremble with relief and vindication. Every malicious smile Juliet had cast her way, every humiliating moment, now dissolved under the truth. The revelations didn't just destroy Juliet's claim, it also forced a reckoning in Richard's marriage. The entire fiasco had started with his affair. Even if her pregnancy was fake or belonged to someone else, he had still broken their vows. As the dust settled, Cassandra made her own announcement to the press. She was separating from Richard indefinitely, focusing on her pregnancy and her well-being. The statement was neither vitriolic nor forgiving. It was simply resolute. For Juliet, the fallout was worse. She faced public shame, possible legal repercussions, and the end of her golden ticket to wealth. Whispers that she'd manipulated medical documents or employed unscrupulous tactics spread like wildfire. No longer the victimized mistress, she was exposed as a cunning deceiver who nearly tore a family apart for profit. Richard began therapy sessions determined to uncover how he'd allowed himself to fall prey to temptation and illusions of grandeur. He publicly apologized to Cassandra, admitting his betrayal had nearly cost him everything. The sincerity was there, but whether it would be enough to rekindle their relationship was a question only time could answer. In the weeks after the paternity bombshell, Cassandra rediscovered parts of herself she'd long neglected. She began attending prenatal yoga classes, forging new friendships with other expectant mothers who supported her without the burdens of wealth or scandal. She poured renewed energy into her charity work, focusing on scholarships for women who faced adversity, a cause that felt more urgent now that she'd weathered her own crisis. The Montgomery mansion felt less like a home and more like a relic of broken dreams. So Cassandra found a peaceful cottage on the outskirts of Atlanta, surrounded by ancient oak trees and flower gardens. It was a place to breathe, to plan for a future she'd raise her child in, with or without Richard, by her side. Friends and family marveled at her resilience. "You're glowing," Samantha Holland observed one afternoon, visiting the cottage. Indeed, Cassandra's pregnancy now radiated an aura of strength, as though she'd harnessed her pain to forge a sharper sense of self. She felt the baby move often, each kick a reminder that life continues, even after devastation. Meanwhile, Richard grappled with the wreckage of his reputation. Several major investors pulled back from deals, wary of associating with a man whose personal fiasco had been splashed across media outlets. His father, Thomas Montgomery, set conditions for continued family support counseling, a moral rehabilitation, and the hope of reconciling with Cassandra. To his credit, Richard complied. He scaled back his once hectic lifestyle, turned down lavish parties, and underwent a genuine period of self-reflection. In a heartfelt letter he sent to Cassandra, he penned, "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I will earn it back day by day, if you let me. I can't change what I did, but I promise never to risk our child's future for my own selfish desires. If we do have a chance, I'll dedicate my life to proving I'm worthy." Cassandra read the letter under the dappled sunlight in her cottage garden. Tears of mixed emotions stained her cheeks. Part of her wanted to burn it. Another part of her remembered their fairy tale beginning. Regardless of whether they reconciled, she accepted that they'd always be connected through their child. Months rolled by, and Cassandra continued to flourish. She set up a new philanthropic initiative aimed specifically at supporting pregnant women who faced abandonment or betrayal. She used her own story, careful not to mention all the gory details, to illustrate how resilience could be forged from heartbreak. Donations poured in from sympathetic supporters who admired her dignified handling of scandal. Juliet, meanwhile, vanished from Atlanta's high society radar. Rumor had it, she fled the city for Europe, possibly under the financial support of the real father of her child, a lesser-known businessman. The public, now aware of her deceit, largely forgot her, moving on to fresh scandals and controversies. As Cassandra approached her due date, Richard's presence became gentler, yet consistent. He showed up to every doctor's appointment, took birthing classes, and stayed in touch, though he respected Cassandra's space in the cozy cottage. Slowly, they mended fractured lines of communication. Apologies turned into cautious laughter and shared memories. They weren't the blissful couple they once were, but each recognized the bond they would share forever through their child. The air was unusually calm that spring evening, with gentle rain tapping against the cottage windows like nature's lullaby. Cassandra had just settled onto the couch, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in hand, when the first sharp wave of pain rippled through her abdomen. At first, she thought it might be another false alarm. Her due date had come and gone 2 days prior. But the next contraction left no doubt. The baby was ready. Within minutes, the cottage turned into a flurry of urgent movement. Cassandra called her parents, who lived just 15 minutes away, and then Richard. Her voice trembled, but her spirit remained compassed. "It's time," she told him. "Meet me at the hospital." By the time she arrived at Northside Hospital in Atlanta, her contractions were just minutes apart. Nurses wheeled her into a private birthing suite, while her mother held her hand, whispering soothing words. Evelyn's presence gave her strength, a comforting anchor amidst the chaos. Richard arrived moments later, slightly breathless, his shirt soaked from the rain. For a second, Cassandra simply looked at him, so much history between them, pain and love, layered like sediment. But right now they were two people about to bring a life into the world. Nothing else mattered. Labor was long. It spanned hours filled with intense pain, deep breathing, and whispered prayers. The doctors monitored the baby closely, and at one point, a minor dip in the baby's heart rate sent a surge of panic through the room. Cassandra clenched Richard's hand, tears streaming down her face as she fought fear. But the medical team remained calm and efficient, and the baby's heartbeat soon stabilized. Just after 3 a.m., with the first soft light of dawn breaking through the hospital blinds, Cassandra gave one final push, and the room erupted in the first cries of her newborn son. Everything stopped. Cassandra collapsed back onto the pillows, her entire body trembling with relief. As the nurse laid the tiny infant on her chest, she looked down and saw him pink-skinned, wailing, utterly perfect. His little fists flailed as if announcing his arrival to the world. Cassandra wept, exhausted, overwhelmed and in awe of the miracle now resting against her. Richard stood nearby, tears streaking his cheeks. He leaned closer, brushing his hand gently against the baby's head. "He's beautiful," he whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "You did it, Cass." She looked up at him, eyes still misty. "We did it." In that room, for a fleeting moment, everything else faded. The courtroom battles the lies. The heartbreak, none of it mattered in the face of this new life. They named the baby Landon Charles Montgomery, a tribute to Cassandra's father and a nod to the strength of both family lines. When the nurse wheeled in a bassinet and the baby was swaddled and placed inside, Richard didn't leave his side for a second. He watched every movement, protective and tender, in a way Cassandra hadn't seen before. 2 days later, Cassandra returned to her peaceful cottage with Landon bundled safely in her arms. Richard helped carry their bags inside and lingered by the doorway, unsure if he should stay. Cassandra turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "This is home now, for both of us, if you're ready to earn your place again." He didn't respond with words. He simply nodded, eyes misting, and stepped inside. Their story was far from over. But in that quiet little cottage, with spring blossoms blooming just outside the window and the soft coos of their newborn son filling the air, it felt like they were exactly where they needed to be. The court battles had ended, the headlines had faded, and the cameras had turned their lenses toward newer scandals. But for Cassandra Montgomery, the true story was only just beginning. It was no longer about lawsuits, lies, or lavish betrayals. It was about rebuilding a life rooted in something real. Motherhood transformed her in ways even she hadn't anticipated. Landon's tiny fingers grasping hers became her anchor, his every coo a call to strength. She fed him under moonlight, sang softly to lull him to sleep, and found peace in the rhythm of their new life together. The chaos of the past months had given way to serenity, the kind that only comes after enduring a storm and realizing you're still standing. The cottage had become her sanctuary, nestled amid blooming dogwoods and chirping birds, a far cry from the marble-cold luxury of the Montgomery mansion. Here she could walk barefoot in the garden, host small tea gatherings for women from her foundation, and watch Landon nap peacefully in a cradle by the window. Her days were quieter now, but each moment held deeper meaning. Her charity flourished in unexpected ways. The public had seen her rise from scandal with poise and empathy, and women from all walks of life reached out, some survivors of betrayal, others struggling young mothers looking for support. Cassandra expanded her foundation to offer legal resources, mental health counseling and housing stipends for women facing crisis pregnancies. Her past no longer defined her. It empowered her to serve others. Meanwhile, Richard remained a quiet but steady presence. He didn't push. He came when invited, left when asked, and respected the boundary Cassandra had drawn. Slowly trust began to form again, not because the past was forgotten, but because he showed up for their son with a kind of consistency she never expected from the man who once disappeared into hotel suites and secrecy. He'd enrolled in therapy, not just for appearances, but to understand the root of his self-sabotage. Cassandra saw the change in him, not loud declarations or grand gestures, but small, steady choices. Like the way he held Landon during sleepless nights, the way he deferred to Cassandra on parenting decisions, or the way he finally listened without defensiveness. One quiet afternoon, Cassandra sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the treetops. Richard joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. For a while they simply watched the wind stir the leaves. "You've changed," she said softly, not looking at him. "I had to," Richard replied. "You gave me the wake-up call I never knew I needed." She turned toward him, her gaze steady. "I'm not promising anything. I'm still healing." I know he nodded. "I just want to be here while you do." It wasn't a reunion sealed with a kiss or a cinematic embrace. It was something quieter, more sacred. two people wounded by each other, trying to see if grace could exist in the same space as pain. As for Juliet Hastings, she faded into the background like a discarded mask after a play. Rumor had it she gave birth in a discreet European clinic, far from Atlanta's judgmental eyes. No lawsuits, no interviews, no more schemes. Her name became a cautionary tale, whispered at fundraisers and garden parties, a woman who gambled with deception and lost everything. Cassandra, by contrast, became a quiet symbol of resilience. She didn't chase attention, but she couldn't avoid admiration. Her story was shared in op-eds, spoken about in university lectures on ethics and media. Yet for her, the only legacy that truly mattered now slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her bed. She had once walked into a courtroom carrying heartbreak and fear. Now she carried her child into a future filled with purpose, strength, and choice. Not every fairy tale ends with a perfect prince, but sometimes the heroine becomes her own happy ending. In life, deception often parades itself with calculated confidence, just like Juliet's smug smile in that courtroom. But when her carefully orchestrated lies were exposed, the triumph belonged to honesty and resilience. Cassandra's unwavering determination, bolstered by her love for her unborn child, became a powerful testament to the strength we discover in our darkest hours. She emerged with a renewed sense of self, reclaiming her future on her own terms.